Welcome to the place where you'll hear from HR leaders, people experts, and wellbeing professionals. You'll learn about their personal and professional journeys, hear about the future of HR and wellbeing, and take away actionable insights and tips. This is the HR and Wellbeing Insider Podcast. Hi, Elliot. Welcome to the podcast today.
Hi, Paul. Great to be here.
Yeah, nice to have you here. So Elliot is Head of Workplace Wellbeing Strategy at SuperWellness. Great to have you here today to talk about prevention strategy, what businesses can do in their workplace wellbeing strategy and how they can move forward. It'd be great to start off with, though, how did you get into the role you're in today? What was your journey into workplace wellbeing?
Well, it's a bit of a strange one, Paul. So if I was to tell you that my undergraduate's in animal biology, so very kind of out there, nothing to do with humans at all, really. Did that and then realised that wasn't the field for me. A couple of things happened in between and actually went on to study business psychology as a master's degree at Loughborough. And from there, one of the first units that we did was wellbeing at work. And during that time, I was struggling mentally myself, and I thought this is a great kind of something I'd never come across before. This is a great unit. This is something that's so needed. And even then, looking around kind of wasn't something that I could see in the job market as being really obvious. It's not like if you're, for example, going to do a HR degree or master's, you'll then type in human resources and you'll get so many jobs come up. There was very little out there, but that didn't kind of put me off. So I did that, graduated from Loughborough, and then started the job search to have a think about where we are, what I could go forward with it. Thought about kind of the classic grad schemes at London. A lot of my colleagues were doing, counterparts, and actually I thought this isn't for me. Don't want to get kind of lost in the big city and kind of not being able to make that impact as I really would like to. So I was fortunate enough to start working for a small firm called Worth Positive Education, where we looked at very much workplace wellbeing, but within areas of education, areas that looked at children or young people, and really looking at it, how we can look at it from what is called a whole school approach. And that's kind of led me on to where I am now. After that, I worked internally at Nottingham University Hospitals Trust within the staff wellbeing team. Across the NHS, there are kind of differing approaches to staff wellbeing in terms of resource. I was lucky enough, because I live in Nottingham, I got the role there, that it was quite a large team. I think there was maybe 9 of us.
Wow.
Which is for an NHS public sector body really good. And I worked there leading on the mental health side of the program, and then just before I left started to implement and talking about trauma-informed practice, TRIM, and very much from that side of it, delivering workshops, but also project managing parts of the program as well. From there, I was fortunate enough to get a role at Leicestershire Public Health. They were looking to expand kind of their public health, as you may or may not know, very much usually focuses on the community, how we can improve the health there. And what they wanted to do was actually be able to support local businesses to become healthier places to work. They'd never had the role before, and they were hiring someone to come in, design the program, and in terms of being able to support organizations from an evidence-based point of view. So I was very fortunate to get that role. And in that role, I very much designed the program, delivered it, marketed it, absolutely everything, worked with organizations to do that. And that was very much from a Leicestershire focus. And that program's still running, Healthy Workplaces Leicestershire and Rutland, so helping loads of businesses across the 2 counties there. And then about a year and a half ago, I got the role at SuperWellness as a workplace wellbeing strategy consultant. Again, there wasn't anyone that had done the role before, so it was very much starting it up from kind of the ground upwards. And I've done a lot of work over the last year and a half to really bring our knowledge, because SuperWellness, we've been around since 2011. We've iterated quite a lot. If you look into the background of us, we very much started as getting nutrition into workplaces. But actually, as we know and what the evidence says, having that strategic point of view, turning kind of tick box exercises or one-off events ad hoc into more strategically aligned interventions is what really makes a difference. And that's what Angela Steele, our CEO, brought me in to do. Of create the program, create the kind of strategy offering, but also from there, we've kind of developed onto how do we support the workplace wellbeing professional, because there wasn't a lot of support there. And came in last January 2024. And then this year I was promoted to head of wellbeing strategy. So alongside all the client work, I also sit on the senior leadership team at SuperWellness to think about how we can support as many organizations as possible going forward and grow the organization. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour.
Yeah, nice. Exciting, yeah. And it's a really good experience, actually. And imagine working in the NHS and, the council. I imagine that was tough because it's, we talk about a lot of the workplace wellbeing stuff we talk about, or that I certainly see as, private organizations, businesses. But, in the NHS, supporting the teams with staff mental wellbeing, I mean, that must have been, not an easy task.
No, not at all. And I think it's gave me that understanding of the real importance and real key need for looking at what the data was, not just kind of thinking, oh, well, we've got this budget, we've got this time with this resource, let's give it a go and see if it works or not.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, historically and stereotypically, public sector organizations don't have as much budget as maybe a private sector. I know stereotyping there, but quite often true. So we had to make sure that everything that we were doing was directed at the real need for the staff. And my partner, she works in the NHS still, so I still get kind of an ongoing feedback of kind of the trials and tribulations of what not only she goes through, but I'm sure every other colleague in her trust and across the NHS in general and public sector are feeling at the moment. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, definitely. And in terms of, so a couple of things you talked about there, and at the council, helping organizations think about, being healthy businesses and looking after health and well-being. It's all around prevention and also strategy. And I dare say there's two questions here. So we hear workplace wellbeing strategy banded around a lot, particularly on LinkedIn. And, is that just a buzzword? Is it a buzzword? Is it a phrase that everyone talks about? Strategy. And then secondly, prevention is key. Yeah. And I've been in employee benefits for, nearly 10 years now, and prevention is key, and trying to get in front of these things, health conditions and mental health and well-being is key. But why are organizations missing the prevention piece? How is it so often overlooked? So two things there, really.
Yeah. So in terms of strategy, is it a buzzword? I think the difficulty with it is particularly around workplace wellbeing, and this is something that I touch upon quite a lot if anyone connects with me or follows me on LinkedIn, and a lot of the free events that I do, as well as talking around wellbeing strategy, it becomes a buzzword because quite often no one's shown what it means. So actually you'll hear about it on LinkedIn a lot, or you'll hear about it, but actually how do we as a in-house workplace wellbeing professional, what does that actually mean in practice? If you were to Google it, ChatGPT it, whatever, actually there's very little out there to guide someone in terms of what a strategy actually means. So I think that's the danger of banding around a word like strategy. From my and SuperWellness's point of view, strategy is very much around having that data-driven, evidence-based plan, really focusing on, okay, what are the needs of the staff? What objectives are we going to put in place off the back of that are related to the data, but also the wider business? Because there's no point putting a wellbeing strategy in place if they're kind of going against the wider business plan. In essence, you're not going to get leadership buy-in. So you've got to bring in the wider business context. You've got to think about, okay, well, what are we going to put in place? Be realistic. What budget, what resource have we got over the next 3 to 5 years? And think about what the end-term goal is and how we're going to measure impact. And that's something that we talk about quite often on one of the free events that I do, Workplace Wellbeing with Impact Roundtable. Is actually what does a workplace wellbeing strategy mean? Because, as I said, there's not much out there to guide people. And yeah, sorry, go for it, Paul.
Yeah, no, fine. That's good. Really interesting. And I think that's true. I think, we can see this on LinkedIn and people talking about strategy. But I think, like you said, having that data-driven approach and thinking about short, medium and long term is actually really key. So you can lay it out and then start to work towards those goals and objectives is really key. So that's important. And then I think on the prevention piece, so we talk about that a lot and we see that a lot, but our businesses actually doing anything about it, and are they working on it, and what are their challenges?
Yeah, so the prevention piece is a difficult one. Historically, workplace wellbeing is still quite a new industry in terms of it coming to the forefront of some organizations' minds. And actually, for a lot of organizations, there's still a long way to go. Some senior leaders, it's not in the forefront of their mind for whatever reason there is. There's absolutely, there's reasons why. Wellbeing, workplace wellbeing has kind of very much fallen into the fact of, okay, we need to support people. And this was kind of created or enhanced off the back of the pandemic. So during furlough, a lot of organizations wanted to support their staff. Really great, which is really good. The staff had time to do things. So what could staff do? They could do events. They were able to support them because actually a lot of staff weren't working. Okay, well, let's support them through an EAP, or let's do an online event, whatever that might be. And what that actually created, as much as it was great during the time, it created kind of a misnomer about workplace wellbeing that's what it is. It's something that people need to attend. It's something that people need to do. Whereas actually, if you think about workplace wellbeing from a preventative focus and you look at what are the drivers of poor workplace wellbeing in your organization, whether that be unsupported line management, so they don't know how to support their staff, untrained line management, we know is a huge issue across many organizations, lack of development opportunities, whatever it might be. What are the real drivers of poor workplace wellbeing? If we look at those, wellbeing becomes an outcome. We actually start to improve that, but alongside improving wellbeing, we know that, for example, if we have better line management, people are more engaged, more motivated, they're going to perform better. And that kind of comes back to why prevention is so important, because if we just focus on the support aspect, not only are we only catching people once they're already ill and already off, and that absenteeism kind of cost and retention and people leaving, whatever it might be, but actually we're not really looking at what the key drivers are, and we can't turn it from just looking at well-being to being a business critical driver of performance and motivation. And that's why prevention is key. Because if you're just signposting people to an EAP all the time, for example, that's not going to stop people getting ill or being unmotivated, being unengaged with the workforce. And people will leave and get ill. Yeah. That's why it's so important.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you talked about an EAP online events, employees attending things. And I agree, since the pandemic, it's really, really grown as a market, which is good and bad, I think. Maybe another conversation on that separately. But in terms of companies then, so I think, a lot of companies might see it as a bit of a tick box exercise when it comes to workplace wellbeing. So, based on what you've said, it's not hard for them to do that. Well, it's the next awareness day, etc. What are the signs that you see with companies where they think it's having an impact, but actually when you look at it and you look at the strategy and you think actually this is just a tick box exercise that you've gone down?
Yeah. So, and for anyone that follows me on LinkedIn will know that I give awareness days a hard time. I think I purposefully do it to try and challenge people's perceptions on what workplace wellbeing is. Awareness days and awareness events absolutely are a key part of a wider wellbeing strategy, but a wellbeing strategy isn't just a set of awareness days and events. I always say to people on our one-day wellbeing lead training is that your strategy should guide which awareness days you do, not your awareness days should guide your strategy. And often it becomes that you'll go to organizations and they'll say, I'll ask them, have you got a strategy? Oh, yes, we've got a calendar of events. Whereas actually that's not a strategy. That's the point about that. I think the other important point is actually when we talk about performatism and kind of what's mentioned, maybe the term well-being washing, similar to greenwashing. So we're doing things because we want to look good. Actually, our CEO, Angela Steele, a couple of years ago, as part of her master's dissertation, did a research project specifically on this. And actually what she found is a lot of the time, the performative nature of it isn't on purpose. Actually, senior leaders in organizations and even workplace wellbeing professionals are doing what they're doing because that's what they believe is right, what they believe works. Yes, you'll get the odd performative kind of culture, but actually, quite often, the reason why they're not doing the preventative stuff is because that's not what they believe. That's not what they know about. The knowledge gap is there. They don't know how to do it. Yeah. And actually, so a lot of the work that I do is trying to reframe, as I said, workplace wellbeing to try and help both workplace wellbeing professionals, but also senior leaders and what they believe well-being to be. Because if we can reframe senior leader perception of it, we can then actually start to give the workplace wellbeing professionals who are in-house the autonomy and the resource to make those preventative changes.
Yeah. And actually, that it leads me into the follow-up question here is that you talk a lot on LinkedIn in your articles online around supporting the workplace wellbeing lead, helping them, training them, delivering them the knowledge. Why is it so important that they have that in place? Because a lot of these roles are normally on the back of HR, head of people roles, head of people and culture, and then workplace wellbeing falls in. So you talk a lot about supporting those people.
Yeah, it's really important because if we start first of all, by thinking that well-being is something like every other business function that needs strategic direction and leadership. Although the well-being of staff is something that everyone should think about when making changes or decisions, just like kind of we think about with health and safety, there's processes that we go through within organizations that you think, okay, if we're making this change, is it going to impact or negatively impact the health and safety of our staff? Because of legislation, we have to look at that. We need to protect ourselves from that. And although well-being is something similar, there is a need for someone to lead upon that. And the gap where we have now is that there's a huge lack of direction. There's no governing body in the UK guiding workplace well-being professionals, whether they are doing it as a substantive role, their whole role, or they have it as kind of part of the role, as you mentioned there, HR, occupational health, health and safety, and it's bolted onto the side. There's no direction on what actually works. So what does the evidence base say works? And as we know, if we're talking about evidence-based, it's going to be a lot more impactful. It's going to be efficient. It's going to be more effective. There's no one telling them what that is, or it's very difficult to find. But also, there's a lot of individuals, as we've said, working in-house within roles where well-being's a bolt-on, or even by as a whole role, and they're working alone. They didn't have anyone prior to them in the role that they can ask for guidance on what worked and what didn't. And there's very little training out there to kind of guide them. And if this is something that they want to continue to develop in, how do they know what skills they need to develop to be able to be successful in their role? Yes, you can stumble across what works, pilots, etc., but that's going to take a lot of time. The reason why I put a lot of emphasis on supporting the wellbeing lead is because they need more support and direction. And sometimes, as we've kind of seen a lot of during our one day wellbeing lead training and the membership off the back of it is actually, it's a lot about just seeing that someone else has the same challenges. That it's not just them doing things they might feel. It's that imposter syndrome. They might feel that, am I doing this right? Is this what I should be doing? I'm not seeing the impact I was expecting because I'm seeing all this stuff on LinkedIn from other organizations that are doing great stuff. So actually that wider support from not only myself and SuperWellness, but other professionals in the same industry, giving them an understanding of kind of, well, you're not alone in this and we can work through it together. Because without it, it's very difficult to keep going on a daily basis. Because quite often, as you'll know, people get into the roles because they're really passionate, often might have a personal story. They're people. They want to support individuals. And when you're not seeing that quick, fast change, it's really difficult to kind of keep going. So in essence, that's why we do it, because we want to support the individual, but also by supporting the wellbeing lead or workplace wellbeing professional to be more evidence-led, to be more impactful. That's going to be better for the business. It's going to be better for the outcomes and the staff. So it's a win-win across the board.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Makes total sense. And a couple of points there. So first of all, you talk about quick wins, fast turnaround on programs. From a workplace wellbeing lead, when they're thinking about their strategy, their program, and the things they're doing all the way out through the year, how quick should they start to see changes from an effective workplace wellbeing program? Because it's something I actually saw this on LinkedIn this morning, and I think there's a bit of a different approach or a different view of how quick that needs to be, because then you've got to get the investment up front from your organization. But how quick does that happen? And there's probably a lot of variables in here as well.
Yeah, it is massively variable. And I guess the question is what is it that they're looking to achieve? What change are they looking to achieve? Is it a cultural change? Then that obviously is going to take a bit longer. If it's something that might be more of a quick win, so for example, you look at, if you identify that line management, for example, is a potential cause of stress and you don't have a training program in place, a quick win, I say quick win, it might be to start implementing some management training and then measuring the impact of that, not only from the engagement from managers, but also are the managers actioning what they've learned, and are staff feeling that? And that's how kind of important surveys are, well-designed surveys, not just asking, what did you think of the last event? But actually, do you feel confident that your manager would support you in a well-being conversation, for example, if that's what you're looking at? So I guess the question is, and it's a bit of a cop-out, but it's, what is it that you're looking to implement? And of course, put quick wins in place, especially if you're on the start of your journey, because you want to start that momentum. You want to start for your wider employees to understand this is something that you care about. But at the same time, and I've just posted about this morning on LinkedIn, is that you don't want to jump straight into the doing, because if you do that, you ignore all the data. And what, in essence, all you're doing is throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks, and that'll become wasteful. Some things might work, some things might not, but it becomes very wasteful. And that's kind of when that cynicism around well-being starts to creep in, both from wider employees, but also senior leaders.
Yeah. I think quick wins are important. But I also think it's about being realistic, which is what you've talked about there in terms of what are we trying to achieve, because you're not going to change the whole organization's culture overnight or in weeks or months. It's a long process. But I think also what I'm picking out there is measuring it and making sure the changes are happening, and you're seeing the engagement, which is important. And actually, we talk about engagement, and you've mentioned data quite a bit here. What are these, workplace wellbeing leaders, people looking after this in their organization? What data are you talking about? What data can they get their hands on right now today that is going to help them with a workplace wellbeing strategy?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And obviously it depends organization to organization, but in general, having a look at what surveys you run at the minute. If you run an engagement survey, it's very likely that you will have some sort of well-being data in there, whether it's as in-depth as you'd like to identify kind of the drivers of poor well-being. It might not, but at least it'll give you something. Do you have any employee voice events? Do you have any ways of hearing what employees are saying, feedback routes? Do you have employee representation groups, mental health first aiders, your champions? How are you gathering feedback from them to understand what the challenges are within the organization? At the moment, a lot of organizations will have mental health first aiders or champions. They'll ask them to have conversations and promote events, but actually very rarely will they complete that feedback loop and ask mental health first aiders or champions to talk to them about the types of conversations that they're having, to give them a source of data of, okay, well, as a group, we've had 200 conversations over the last quarter. This many percentage was on anxiety at work. And that's a point of data that's really useful. A lot of the time, we've got these things in place already. It's gathering that data, having the platform. It's something that we've just launched in our Wellbeing Insiders program. So it gives people a tool to be able to track that. You've got that. You've got absenteeism data. Some organizations track it kind of in terms of what the reasons are. And that's really good, because then you can use that data. If not, it becomes a bit more challenging to understand what the real issues are. I'd always recommend that. EAPs, some are better than others. Some will give you an understanding of the kind of the topics of conversations that are being had. Obviously, anonymously, we know how important that is, both for kind of staff to feel comfortable, but also, just so that it's a service that they feel it's not being fed back to the organization, because that's often the worry. If you've got private medical insurance data around that kind of stuff, what kind of claims are people making? So, and if it's work related stuff, there's a whole bunch of data that already exists. And if you don't have that kind of stuff, we always talk about creating a well-designed well-being survey that not only asks people's levels of well-being, but also what the drivers are, so we can focus on the preventative. We look at focus groups to dive a bit more into that, get kind of the voices of people that might not complete surveys, people that don't work behind a desk, people that might be out on site, whatever that might be, and also some sort of gap analysis to understand what do you currently have in place. So it's not only about listening to the needs of your staff, but what is it that you've got going on in your organization already? Because it's important to remember that well-being isn't something that just you will have or lead on. Although you lead upon it, if you have a learning and development team, we've talked about management training, they might already be doing something that will impact upon it. If you have equality, diversity, inclusion team, that will impact belonging and impact the well-being, and they might already be doing something. So understanding what the wider organization is doing will help make sure that everything's aligned, but there's not duplication. So that's the kind of data sources that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And there's lots of value in that, actually, what you're talking about, because I think some organizations struggle with, we don't have a lot of data. I think, like you quite rightly mentioned, that they probably are sitting on quite a bit of data. They just don't know where to pull that from.
Yeah.
And I think communication is key, isn't it? So asking your employees, I mean, that's got to be one of the, the easiest in most cases, is to have a conversation with your employees as to what's happening in their world, what are they interested in. And like you say, as long as it's a well-designed questionnaire survey, that's got to be key, isn't it? That communication. And would you say that's probably the easiest sort of form of data gathering to go with, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think surveys are something that staff are used to, whether they're too used to them. And that's why if I get asked the question, what's a good response? I think it's very much dependent on what you've done before. So if I've been into an organization where they've done yearly surveys, but they don't action anything. So when we went in, the survey response was quite low, because actually we're trying to build up what they've done incorrectly in the past. And that's fine. Things get missed. That's absolutely fine. But it's about that communication. So when we do a survey for an organization, we ensure that they're communicating with the staff about why we're doing this, what we're going to do with the data afterwards. We're going to do a strategy, and then we're going to have the wider program. So it's all based on the need of your staff. And also, if you've got to think about it from a survey point of view, if yourself, Paul, you complete a survey, you only ever know what you've written in it. So if an organization jumps straight from doing the survey to this is the strategy, and you don't see anything that you've written in it, you'll think, oh, well, they've not listened to me. You'll go talk to your mates, and you'll say that, and they'll probably agree. And that's when that cynicism becomes across. Quite often organizations miss the center step, which is saying, this is what the overall message was, and this is what kind of we're going to look to do. Because then staff can then start to realize, okay, well, at least they might not have picked out something individually from me, but they've looked at what the majority of people have said.
Yeah, they're listening.
Yeah, they're listening. And actually, and I say this quite often on the Workplace Wellbeing with Impact Roundtable event that I do, even if you think you know exactly what your organization, like the needs of your organization are, still do it. Because just by giving them an employee voice, as we know from business psychology, giving people an employee voice means that they're much more likely to engage with things once you start putting them in place. Even if you're spot on, if you don't ask them, they feel like, oh, well, it's another big brother decision with something else that we've got to do, even if it's something that's linked to them. Yeah. So asking them, giving them a voice, they're much more likely to engage with it once you come to implementing it.
Yeah, good. Really, really important, really important. And you talked about in the date, when we were talking about the data there, you talked about things like absence data, private medical insurance claims, things like that. In terms of employee benefits, lots of benefits out there, private medical insurance, income protection, EAPs you talked about. In terms of benefits, how do you go about when you're running your programs and your training? How do you go about linking those benefits into a workplace wellbeing strategy? Because they're almost two different arenas, employee benefits, perks, rewards, and then workplace wellbeing. But there's clearly a really strong link. But where do they fit in? How would you fit them into the strategy?
Yeah, it's a common challenge, and actually something I'd freely admit, employee benefits perks aren't my kind of wheelhouse, but obviously they fit into well-being. So it's very much, whenever I do any consultancy or strategy work with organizations, I'll say to them, this is a collaborative approach. You've got to let me know what you have already, so then we can measure whether it is impactful and whether it's worthwhile. So then when we do the data gathering, we'll ask specific questions around the perks and benefits if they don't already ask questions in another survey around it. And I'll talk to them, okay, well, why do you have this in place? What are the objectives for it? Is it being utilized? And are you getting data back from it? And if the answer to a lot of those are no, then I'll probably ask them to think about why it is that they're doing it. It's exactly the same with well-being. If they're doing a well-being intervention and they don't know why they're doing it, they shouldn't be doing it. So it all fits in. It all has the same outcome in terms of improved well-being. In my mind, employee perks benefits are very much around the supporting aspect, supporting people to be better, healthier, whatever that might be. Yes, if in terms of medical insurance, you might have a bit of a preventative focus there as well. EAP possibly, depending on how proactive individuals are. But for me, it's well-being sits very much at the preventative for the work-related side of it. So how do we identify what's causing work-related stress, work-related illness? And that's, in my mind, how we separate the two and implement them both into a well-being strategy. Because when we're supporting an organization to a well-being strategy, we'll talk about both the preventative. How do we make individuals more resilient or mindful to changes to be able to cope better? But also then how do we support individuals after they've gotten ill? Because not everything's work related and people might slip through the gaps. So it's that wide range of support. And that's where employee perks benefits do fit in.
Yeah. I love that. Really like that description of how you've put that across there, the two different things. And finally, Elliot, if a HR leader is sitting here today watching our podcast episode and they want to do a reset on their workplace wellbeing strategy, what are the things they could take away? What are the things they could do, in the next week for the second half of 2025, really start to reset and think about their workplace wellbeing strategy? Yeah. What are their quick wins, if you like, if they were going to do that?
Well, quick wins. And I was having a conversation with someone about this the other day I was saying to them is actually, in terms of what you're going to be able to do in the next 6 months, just continue what you're doing. Start setting up for 2026. Thinking about, okay, gathering the data. What data have you got available to you? And if you've not got it available, how can you start to gather that data and analyze it now? The more data and the more time you have to be able to plan, the less firefighting you're going to have to do. One of the reasons why organizations and individuals miss the data gathering part is because it can take a bit of time. And we, as an individual, without a team, we might not have the resource to be able to do it. And we jump straight to kind of the interventions part. As we've spoken about, there's dangers that come with that. So it's looking at what is the data, both internally, what does the evidence base say works, and really make sure that for 2026 and beyond, why is it that we're doing certain things? Are we just doing it because that's what our competitors is doing, the organization next door are doing, what I've seen on LinkedIn another organization do? Or is it actually because that's what our staff is saying is the issues they need support with, and actually this is what you can identify as the key issues? It's all about data. If you start with data, you can't go far wrong. After that, it's think about, if we've got a strategy, rather than just writing your strategy and following it tooth for nail for the next 3 years, making sure you've got points within it to evaluate it. Because we know things change, pandemics, whatever it might be, organizational changes. There's no point you saying, well, this is what I said at the start of 2026. We're doing this till 2029 without anything changing. We've got to make sure that if something isn't working in the first 6 months, evaluate it. Think about what changes can we make, because things might not always land as you might want them to. The theory of it might not actually work in practice, and you might need to change a little bit. That's why pilot's really important as well. Yeah. Think about, if you want to make any big changes, think about pilots. That's how you can also get senior leadership buy-in. For if you want to make a large-scale change, ask them for a pilot budget. Get that data in and make sure you evaluate it. So for me, it's not in terms of what they can do this year. They can build up to it by starting that communications piece around what they're going to do next year and get senior leaders and other key stakeholders on board. But what data do they have or do they need to be able to hit 2026 running? Because the last thing that they want to do was get to the new year after Christmas and think, oh, I've got a full calendar of events I need to fill here. What do I do in January? Yeah. Because I can guarantee that is where the majority of wellbeing providers get their kind of the inquiries from. In January, people get back and think, oh, I've got to do something now, because they've been focusing on something different. Start thinking about it now.
Yeah, really key. I think that's fantastic advice. And I think, I've taken from that is start preparing 3-6 months in advance, start gathering the data, thinking about how you're going to communicate that data internally. And also, really important point there is putting the time in to evaluate, stop, pause. Is this working? Do we need to change course a little bit? Go again, I think is also really important. Yeah. I mean, lots of people I know, including me, have great plans, for 2025, I'm going to achieve X, Y, Z, and then get to the end of the year and go, that didn't quite work. Whereas actually stopping, pausing, looking and reviewing is really important. Really enjoyed the conversation, Elliot. Thank you so much. Added a lot of value. I will link your LinkedIn profile and your content, your newsletter and things in the show notes. Thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been really great to have you here.
No problem. Thanks, Paul. Great to be here.
Super. Thank you for listening to the HR and Wellbeing Insider Podcast. Look out for the next episode, and in the meantime, sign up to our newsletter in the comments below to hear more from our guests and news and tips on HR and wellbeing. See you in the next episode.